Well, to discuss this, I'm joined here in the studio by Yahya Al-Aridi. He's the spokesman for the Syrian Negotiation Commission. In Berlin is Fadel Abdul Ghany. He's the chairman and founder of the Syrian Network for Human Rights. And also in Berlin, we have Kevork Almasian. He's the founder of Syriana Analysis, an alternative Syrian news website. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us here on The Newsmakers. Yahya Al-Aridi, is it clear to you that rebels, most likely HTS, Hay'at Tahrir al Sham, conducted that chemical attack which injured more than 100 people?
Well, Imran, we have to know facts about this particular situation. Russia has been talking about the use of chemical weapons or gas for the past few months by rebels. And the purpose for that is to tell the world, because the regime is under so much pressure regarding this particular file, that the rebels are the ones who are using chemical weapons. They themselves decided that the rebels did that, and it was done from that particular base, targeting that particular place, and immediately they started punishing or bombarding that particular point. And they investigated it, ready with a team and ready with a media team. Now, the purpose for that is to really abort or destroy or obstruct the Sochi Accord between Turkey and Russia.
But even if it does obstruct or abort, as you say, any semblance of peace or ceasefire, and even if they use it as an excuse to kick off again, right? It still doesn't make it untrue, right? It's quite possible that HTS got hold of chlorine. They're in that part of Idlib, close to Aleppo, and they launched it, and 100 people are injured. Why is that so difficult to believe?
Well, if al-Nusra did it, it would be certain agents who are planted by Russia or the regime.
But they're Al-Qaeda. Do you really
Iran,
think
or Al-Qaeda,
they're incapable of
in order to abort this accord, because it hurts them. They live on tension. This is the point. They have been making a propaganda for the past few months that the rebels or the opposition or whatever are going to use gas.
But isn't it more likely that these are just really bad rebels that most people consider to be terrorists and nobody wants as a part of the future of Syria, and they've done a terrible thing?
We want to get rid of them. Syria wants to get rid of them before the regime itself, before Iran and before Russia. Because for Russia, for Iran, for the regime, they are providing the pretext depending on what they depend on in order to continue with this tension, in order to continue with their war, in order to continue with their control of Syria. So this is a situation the only party that benefits from is the regime and Iran.
Kevork Almasian, these airstrikes, which are most likely to have been Russian, I mean, they have admitted to it, but you know, sometimes the language is kind of vague. Were they justified?
Actually, this is not the first time that there is a chemical incident in Syria. In the previous incidents, always the blame was on the government before any kind of solid investigation in this regard. This time, my call is for the OPCW to come underground in Aleppo and check whether or not the chemical weapon has been used and what kind of chemical materials were used this time. Actually, the Russian side was bombarding the HTS positions in coordination with the Turkish army, and the Turks were also positive with that, because the HTS, Hay'at Tahrir al Sham, is not part of the Sochi Accord. It's not part of the Idlib deal, and it's supposed to be disarmed and supposed to be fought not only by the Russian side but also the Turkish side. Therefore, an attack that comes from the HTS controlled area on a government-held area, all fingers are pointed to the HTS, but until this moment, I call on the OPCW to come underground and investigate this case, because in the previous cases, for example, in Khan al-Assal in 2012, the first chemical incident that happened in Syria, the UN investigator Carla Del Bonte, she pointed out that the rebels used chemical weapons at that time, and when the investigators came to Syria in 2013, on the same night that the OPCW investigators arrived to Syria, there was another chemical attack just 10 kilometers away from the investigators in order to abort that mission. And that was successful, actually. In 2013, when the chemical attack happened in Ghouta, the or the OPCW investigators couldn't go to Khan al-Assal because there was a newer case in Syria. So whether it is justified or not, any attack on HTS and ISIS is justified, not only according to the Syrian constitution, but according to the Sochi, according to the UN resolutions in this regard.
Okay, let me move this on slightly and bring in Fadel. Fadel Abdul Ghany, if it can be absolutely ascertained that HTS did this chemical attack, and now it's bearing the brunt of the attacks from the Russians, and the whole prospect of Idlib is in question now, and whether that ceasefire is going to hold, is HTS spoiling any potential for reconciliation, any potential for putting out this fire?
I don't know how we are fooling. All the reports is available online. We cannot throw words like this. Actually, this is actually shameful for the people. Actually, we are fooling people. Everyone knows very well that Carla De Ponte, when she said that the Commission of Inquiry announced, and they have statement that it's her own personality, and that's wrong. This is the first point. The second point is the Commission of Inquiry reports are and they are all available online. They condemn the regime by 13 times using the chemical weapons.
Okay.
This is the first
but
point. The second
Fadel,
point is
in this
that
instant,
OPCW.
In this instant, okay, so let's state as fact. Let's state as fact that in the past. Fadel, 1 second.
They don't have.
Fadel, 1 second. Let's state as fact that the regime has used chemical weapons in the past. Certainly. Let's state as fact that the regime has used chemical weapons in the past.
Incident,
but let's talk about this one. Now go ahead.
Yeah. Also, because I want to go back to Khan al-Assal. Khan al-Assal, the regime committed attack against his own people, and Khan al-Assal under his control, and the Commission of Inquiry investigate, and the report is available, and they accuse the regime by this attack, by his Air Force's plan. So that's very clear, and the report is available for everyone. This is then the third point. The launching of the chemical weapons is very complex. Complexity. The Al-Nusra didn't committed any chemical attacks in all of those years. Daesh or ISIS committed 2 attacks. All the remaining attacks is implemented by the regime. It's not easy, and for all time the regime is fighting the OPCW with the Russian. The Russian veto used 6 times against the chemical files in Syria. 15 days ago, they make here a voto in Hague against the ability for OPCW, and they are now calling them to investigate and to point out who is the perpetrator, and we are also enhancing this investigation and calling the OPCW to do this, and everyone will reveal that that this attack is, I'm sure, implemented by the regime, because Al-Nusra, I'm telling and I'm confirming, they don't have this ability. I'm not defending Al-Nusra. Right. They are killing my friend Ra'ed Fares.
Allow me to come in here, because we've got 2 other guests here. We have about 5 minutes left on this segment. I think both you and Kevok, you got there in a different way, but you both agree that the OPCW would be the best arbiter of what exactly happened there, and I'm glad that that is the case. Let me then slightly shift this and talk about Nusra, because Fadel, you say Nusra doesn't have the capability. HTS, Nusra, just for the sake of our viewers, sometimes these are used interchangeably. Al-Qaeda, HTS, Nusra. Let's use HTS. Let me bring you in, Yahya Al-Aridi. At the same time, they're assassinating, most likely to have assassinated these 2 activists, such as Ra'ed Fares, one of them as well. Now, again, we look at motive and we look at who benefits. The regime benefits, right? Ra'ed Fares speaks out against the regime. That doesn't mean that HTS didn't kill him. It's quite likely that they killed him, right?
Well, there is a real intricacy there. Nusra says that it's against the regime. But in reality, whatever the Nusra has done so far is at the service of the regime. When the regime and Iran in particular expressed their rejection of the Idlib Accord as a de-escalation area in Astana, al-Nusra provided the pretext for them to obstruct this particular accord.
But it doesn't mean they're working with them, does it?
I believe
there's a symbiotic relationship because the one action precipitates a reaction.
Exactly, they are coordinating with them because it's against them. They are living on tension. Exactly the same as the regime and Iran. If there is no more tension in Syria, Iran would cease to have any particular plan or particular ambitions to continue with its project in Syria. Now, another thing. Now, if we think of what happened in Astana regarding the de-escalation area, Iran said that this particular agreement would not hold. And it threatened that it would obstruct it.
But maybe they just weren't being optimistic. Maybe they just looked at 7 years of history and said, well, maybe this isn't great.
In Sochi, Iran was not there. The accord was signed by Turkey and Russia. And Iran has a real interest. And through Al-Qaeda, it has connection with al-Nusra. It provides them with the pretext they want. And this has continuously been the case. With Geneva, for instance, Imran, every round of Geneva, every round of Astana is punctuated by the regime and by Iran by a certain terrorist act that would divert attention from focusing on the political issue to the terrorist issue. And then Bashar al-Ja'fari would say, well, we have to fight terrorism.
How do you think HTS would feel hearing you say that actually they're being manipulated by the Iranians and the
Not
regime?
manipulated, they are being implemented as people there who are providing them with a pretext in order to exploit everything, in order to obstruct everything. And they are constituting a real problem for the Russians. Okay. And now Russia, as I said earlier, have been talking about the use of chemical weapons. And who is spreading or disseminating this information about the use of chemical weapons? Nusra itself, Russia and Iran through their propaganda in the media. And then the only loser out of all this is the Syrian people, who are being the victims of the use of prohibited weapons, chemical weapons, and who are being the victims of everything. Nobody pays attention to them.
Kevok?
Actually, in the last minutes that we heard from your guest in Ankara or Istanbul, he was indirectly defending the HTS, mainly Al-Qaeda, for the previous minutes, and then he says the HTS is the agent of the Syrian regime. Actually, in the last couple of weeks, HTS infiltrated several times into Syrian army positions, especially in northern Latakia and in northern Hama, and they killed over 25 Syrian soldiers. Only today, the Syrian army lost 3 soldiers in northern Latakia. So the HTS is not under real control, and nobody is able to control Al-Qaeda in Idlib. And according to all resolutions, everybody should fight HTS. But until this moment, who is fighting HTS? Who is fighting underground ISIS? It's the Syrian army, it's the Russian Air Force. Let's not fool ourselves by telling that Al-Nusra Front, sometimes it's a cute, moderate rebels, and sometimes it's a radical. We can't play this game. It's either a terrorist organization that could conduct any kind of terrorist attacks, including chemical attacks, or it's a rebel group that are saints and they are fighting against a dictatorship. We have to choose. We can't say this narrative and after 2 minutes we repeat another, we say another narrative. HTS is a terrorist organization. It holds a Wahhabi ideology, and Wahhabism comes from Saudi Arabia, doesn't come from Iran. So saying that HTS is an Iranian agent, it's really funny. I don't know if there is any sane person who is watching us can believe that Al-Qaeda is an Iranian organization, because in Afghanistan, in Chechnya, in Syria, in Iraq, including in Nigeria, it's Saudi Arabia supports this organization and not Iran.
Yahya, I'm going to give you a chance to respond very briefly and then give Fadel the final word. Yeah, Yahya, come in.
Well, nobody quarrels with the fact that al-Nusra is a terrorist organization. Nobody quarrels with the fact that Al-Qaeda is a terrorist organization. But at the same time, we have to take into consideration that the regime is using particular persons and infiltrating these particular organizations through Iran with good connections historically with Al-Qaeda. They are providing with Iran and the regime with the pretext they want.
So you believe not because of ideology, but because of political expediency, they're using them to...
They are using them, exactly. This
enact
is the
political
situation.
ends on the
and
ground.
at the same time, the regime doesn't care
But you don't have proof for that.
No, the regime doesn't care about losing 10,
I don't
20,
want to go
30,
through this debate
30,
between your...
30
One second, Fadel. 1 second, Fadel. Yes.
Because
Finish up.
the regime is concerned about one particular thing, in just remaining in power.
Right.
Whatever it loses in terms of personnel or young men, Syrians over there, they don't care.
Okay.
But they are concerned mainly about remaining and sitting on that bloody chair all this time.
Okay, and that's where you and Kevok fundamentally disagree. Fadel, let me ask you to wrap us up, but fold into your response this answer. I want to ask you, is the Idlib deal under threat now? Given everything we've seen over the past few days, is the Idlib peace deal under threat?
Yes, of course, it's under threat. But first of all, I don't want to go through this argument at all between that is the regime portrayed al-Nusra or it's for... No. Let us see the goal. They are same. The regime is terrorist and HTS is terrorist group. They are both fighting and killing the civilized movement. They are both killing. The regime is killed Dr. Omar Arnouz, torture thousands of our friends and colleagues. They are all their peaceful movement toward democracy. Al-Nusra is called Ra'id al-Fariz and Hamoud Jnaid, and they are Ra'id also at the beginning, he is opposite the regime himself. So they are served at both the same goal. Regarding your question, of course, but who is we gonna to blame? One month ago, I visited DC and I spoke to the State Department, and I think this also responsibility for the Turkish government as well. We need to actually to invest this truth happened in Idlib in order to remove HTS and all of this extremist group. On contrary, those extremist group is expanded in this. They are using the benefit of this truth. So this is responsibility for the Turkish government or for the civilized country in order to support the local society again in Idlib, the local policemen, the local council, in order to defeat those extremists and remove them again. Now what we are noticing that HTS, they are expanding. They have ability in order to reach to our symbol like Ra'id and Hamoud, and they are of course totally accused by this terrorist assassination for our friends and colleagues, and they are destroying. They are the one who is removing the local policemen and local council. So this responsibility is coming on the shoulder on those civilized country to support the Syrian people. Otherwise, the extremists will expand, and then this will lead to the narrative of the regime and the Russian, and this will come to the very unfortunate result.
Okay, understood. According to the best available estimates, extremist groups possibly control up to 2/3 of Idlib right now. And this is not a good sign for anybody involved. More than 7 years on in this war. Gentlemen, I've got to move on to discuss India with some other guests, but for the moment, let me thank you, Yahya Al-Aridi, Fadel Abdul Ghany, and Kevok Al-Masyan. Thanks again for joining us on the Newsmakers.